So now that I've shown you some of the Sue textbook, I think that gives context for me to show you a couple of my essays that I wrote in that course. We were assigned to keep a journal for the entire course because of the difficult emotions that were expected to arise in response to this material. Now that I look at it, it just seems like it's rather insidious and awful that they're acknowledging that this material is going to be really difficult for you. And I think what it is really doing is it's causing major cognitive dissonance in people. And it's very hard to absorb that kind of, I don't know, I was going to say brainwashing, but I mean, just basically being told that the world is not as you think you understand it and that it's something totally different. I think that that just causes a lot of emotional and intellectual difficulty for people. And so this is really an interesting indoctrination technique. We're gonna show you some things that are going to be hard that you're not going to believe and you're not going to like. And then we're going to tell you that the reason that you don't like them and that you don't believe them and you're having a difficult time is because there's something really wrong with you. And then we want you to keep a journal throughout this entire process and hand it into your teacher so that your teacher can reinforce the indoctrination. And so that's really what was happening. And I'd like to show you a couple of my essays, not partly to show you what I wrote, but mostly to show you the way that the teacher responded to me. And a couple of things of note here. I was unfamiliar with critical race theory or this ideology. As I've said before, I was really naive about this when I came in. I just knew that this didn't feel right. I was trying to be open-minded. And so I'm using some of their terminology, which now makes me cringe just a little bit when I look at this. But I was really trying to accept the framework that I was being offered. I was just struggling with some of the inconsistencies and the failures in logic. And so I really didn't want to play into this competitive victimhood narrative, but I sort of started out by talking about like the idea that racial bullying and discrimination and trauma is not it's not something that a white person can't experience, and this seems so basic and doesn't need to be said, but it felt like it did. It felt like the teacher was not acknowledging that this is possibly the case. So I had started out writing with this teacher about some experiences that I had as a child growing up in South Texas in a minority white neighborhood, and minority white part of the city that I lived in a city that's minority white. So and just kind of using this as a contrast to some of the material, saying, no, I mean, this white privilege checklist doesn't really apply to me. Anyway, now my sense of things is that is really the wrong, that's not the argument that we need to have. We don't need to play by the framework that they're setting up and argue within their victimhood framework. So it's not a way that I would approach it now. But I feel a little bit self-conscious showing these essays, partly because I felt like I was playing into that a little bit at the time. And these are not essays that I ever intended to show to anybody. But what I would like to demonstrate by revealing these is that the teacher really, it's a master class in gaslighting. That's all I can say. So I find her responses, now that I've stepped out of this bubble, which at the time it was a very traumatic experience to me, a very emotional experience to me. But I was questioning myself. I mean, she had me questioning myself. Now that I step back out of it and I'm disengaged from it, it's pretty infuriating to watch someone abuse their academic authority okay, I think I've set it up well enough. I'm going to go ahead and go into these. These are two essays. They're both pretty short, and I'll read them out loud, and then I will also read you the teacher's comments. So let me share my screen. All right. So here we have my journal entry week 4. In thinking of my reaction to reading Sue's book, Counseling the Culturally Diverse, there are aspects with which I agree and those with which I do not agree. But I'm realizing one of the things that makes me most uncomfortable is his quote, zoo approach, end quote, as we briefly discussed in class. He does a good deal of generalizing when it comes to characteristics and experiences of individuals from different backgrounds. I find this uncomfortable to read at times, both when his generalizations focus on white people and when they focus on people from diverse backgrounds. And I feel that he undervalues individual differences in lived experience. Sue mentions numerous times during the text that persons from Asian cultures are more collectivist in orientation, and I wonder whether, as a self-identified Asian American person, he has examined the extent to which he may have internalized this attitude. Perhaps his worldview is biased by this, and it contributes to his tendency to identify people by group and engage in stereotyping. For instance, he continually addresses the reasons why white people may have a problem with his work. He mentions denial of or ignorance due to lack of exposure to non-white populations of the existence of racism. And he talks about defensiveness because of wanting to maintain a pro-social self-image, which is not compatible with internalized racism. What he never addresses, however, is that his generalizations may simply not resonate with the lived experiences of some of the people he is discussing. I can tell you that my experience as a white person does not include denial of racism or protection from racial tension. I've been aware of racism since an early age, as the culture in which I was raised was one in which race was a salient concept. Racial oppression by European colonialists was a topic with which I was familiar from an early age. In South Texas, much of our social studies education in schools centered on the battles for the very land we stood on and the knowledge of the forces on all sides. Texas joining the Union felt recent, and the awareness that white people did not belong on this land was clear. My learning was not only academic, but personal as well. I was exposed to plenty of racial tension, as I have discussed previously. The bullying to which I was subjected was chronic and severe, including social ostracism, physical beatings, etc. If I search myself, I may find some remnants of resentment for certain people, but we were all kids. And though there was a lot of cruelty and hurt, I do not blame anyone for what I went through. There were social forces larger than all of us at play, and with time and wisdom comes understanding. I think the way Sue generalizes the white experience and white attitudes toward race is damaging and alienating, and not in the good, uncomfortable way that promotes growth. The tone of this course so far has also been damaging and alienating, at least to me. I have done so much work over the years to heal from my experiences and to understand the larger picture. I knew that it would be difficult for me to call up memories of painful and formative experiences, and I reached out to the instructor at the outset of the class to ask for connection, help, and guidance as I approached this. Although we have spent quite a bit of time talking about the damage we can cause if, as therapists, we invalidate or dismiss the lived experiences of our clients, this is exactly how my story was received by my instructor. And we are repeatedly told in class that, quote, white women's feelings, end quote, are unimportant. I was told to talk about my experiences in class and attempted to, but the response was that being a bullying victim may make me a less effective therapist and I should reparent myself. The tone deafness and cruelty of this response after my heartfelt attempt at outreach, along with the clear bias of the class, has left me feeling horrible and has bled into my personal life and my performance in other classes. I'm afraid to speak up in class after this and afraid that my instructor has such a bias against me that my evaluations will be impacted. I want to have a mature and elevated discussion about multiculturalism and the different features of identity that impact each of us, and how, as counselors, we can be sensitive and prepared to work with diverse populations. I think this is an important discussion, and I would like to see it handled in a way that does not attack and dismiss individual experiences that are not in line with stereotypical narratives, and truly allows for the myriad ways facets of our identities can intersect. I do not want to dominate the discussion or even share my experiences necessarily, as it makes me very anxious to reveal personal stories to people I do not know well. In fact, I very much resent that I was pushed to do so after saying I did not want to, and then publicly admonished in response. But I do not think it is funny to make white people out to be clueless, quote, Beckies, whose feelings do not matter and who are monolithic in their ignorance and denial. If we are to approach the issue fairly and from an unbiased perspective, we should take a more mature and academic tone and conduct serious discussions of the issues. So in there, I'm responding to this initial email or journal I'd sent her where I talked about like this. I think that this is overly simplistic and my own experiences contradict the work that we're doing here. And I didn't have this experience that he talks about, this white identity formation that happens in like a little white bubble where you're not even aware of other racial groups, and that I'd actually been like in a minority and I've been bullied. And she said, I really encourage you to talk about that in class. Can you bring that up in our next class session? And she asked me to bring it up, and then she dressed me down for it in class. It was really embarrassing. It was pretty humiliating. She told me that I needed to reparent myself so that I didn't do harm to my Latino clients in the future. And it was quite a shocking experience. So that's what I'm referring to here. So then she says, in response, this is her here in the maroon. She says, Leslie, I am concerned about your responses to the class, but not for the reasons you've described here. I see your emotional reactions to the terms the texts and I am using to generalize the majority of white Americans' experiences as personally offensive because they do not resonate for you, and have placed expectations on me as the instructor to modify the course or spend extra time to cater to your unique experience of having experienced racialized oppression as a white person. I am concerned that there is no response I can give that would be adequate enough to resolve this discomfort for you, because my efforts to use inclusive language and stress the need for intersectionality and nuance does not appear to resonate for you. I think I'm representing something unexamined and painful for you at this time. I encourage you to consider speaking with your classmates about your experience of the class, and or to reach out to the course liaison to discuss how this class is affecting you. And so this way that she sort of tries to turn it into some emotional problem that I'm having and invalidate my intellectual arguments with the material. I'll just let you make up your mind what you think about that. But I know what I thought about it. So the next one. This one, as we go through, I'll touch on the little bubbles where you can see the commentary. So this is about the same length. This is week 8. So my writing, I found this week's readings to be an interesting departure from Sue's works on specific racial groups. I particularly enjoyed the chapters on older adults and women, and thought that his implications for clinical practice with older adults, including assuming competence and not cognitive deficits when communication issues arise, were important. I thought it was interesting also that in the chapter on something, I don't know what I put there, I must have missed something. Some chapters, Sue acknowledges that white people make up over 40% of Americans in poverty, yet he does not apply this caveat when discussing white culture in general, and in my opinion, conflates the experience of whiteness at large with the white middle class experience. This hits home for me as I failed to see my experiences reflected in his broad stroke take on the white perspective. So here's her response, is to say that this is a fair criticism, and she gives me a link to check out class discussion in counseling. So that's actually a nice comment. As I said in class, I also found it interesting to hear several classmates discuss their feelings of white fragility and confronting their whiteness as it impacts and shapes their reality and the reality of those around them. I have not had this experience because I have always been aware of myself as a white person, for better and for worse, and I am not processing these concepts as an adult with a fully formed persona that must be disassembled and reconstructed with this new awareness in mind, which is what Sue's book told us to do. Hearing from those with whom these concepts resonate expands my consciousness and illustrates for me the value of these discussions, despite my objection to the generalizations they so often support. So you can see here, I'm just really trying to get on board. I'm trying to be open to this stuff, maybe to a fault. I enjoyed the small group discussion with my classmate today as well. We talked about his experiences growing up as an Iranian kid in a white neighborhood and how he frequently felt left out and different from others. I had similar experiences of ostracism as a child and teenager, and we both felt that we had been hurt by these experiences, but that they had also helped us find certain values that we might not have found without them. For instance, we discussed the value of connection to others and the value of acceptance. These values help us both to be more compassionate and inclusive to others. My classmate also brought up that he was disappointed by the lack of depth in the class discussions, and I agreed that I felt similarly, but said that I was hesitant to discuss it in class. Several other classmates have sent out group emails about this, as there was general frustration with the class and disappointment that we did not get an opportunity to give our feedback mid-quarter. I felt the same and decided I could try to broach the topic delicately. So I decided to offer my thoughts on it in support of my classmate after he spoke. So for context, the teacher went around to every group and asked us to respond to what were the strengths and weaknesses of the class. And he said that he was disappointed with the depth of the discussions. And basically what we had discussed was that it was all very superficial and done in a, like the experience is one of like racial caricature. And so we both felt that this should have been a more serious and elevated and nuanced class. So he said this and she sort of brushed off what he was saying. And so I spoke up and I was like, no, that's not what he meant. And then there was a discussion after which she started to cry, and she cried and she actually referenced her emotional labor. She said, she broke down in front of the class and she said, because I had said, I would have liked to have heard more of everyone's experiences and had a more robust discussion instead of just watching all these goofy videos and getting like these stereotype cliches thrown at us through this book. And she said that she had it had taken a lot of her emotional labor to create the class the way that it was, and that she couldn't have facilitated deeper discussions between us because she wasn't able to make it a safe space. So that was this is what I'm commenting on here. I felt that the instructor response was to be defensive, and I was also surprised by the lack of support from classmates, some of whom have been very vocal outside of class and have even contacted the course liaison over frustrations. In fact, one of the classmates told me when the teacher was crying, the classmate said to me, I think we've heard enough white voices. The teacher was white too, but so they not only didn't come out and support what I was saying, they let me be the one to have this conversation with her where she's crying, and then they shushed me. So that was my experience. So some of them have contacted the course liaison. I have not done so because I think it's important to be more direct in communicating with the instructor rather than going above her. Though I'm upset that I spent so much money and time on the course that mostly involved reading a book I could have read on my own, listening to personal anecdotes from the instructor, and watching funny videos about white people being clueless. So here's the commentary on this. So I said, I decided to offer my thoughts. She says, I was trying to understand your expectations of the course, and my experience of our exchange again seems to be different from yours. Okay. So here, what's she say here? So she's talking about my saying that I spent so much money and criticizing the course as a bunch of personal anecdotes and watching funny videos. And she says, this is a flippant and exaggerated description of the course content and my clinical expertise. And the focus on the cost communicates to me a consumer transaction expectation rather than a learning experience preparing you for difficult clinical work. I have ignored these abrasive remarks up to this point, as some anger is a normal reaction in this course. But as they continue into the end of the quarter, I need to address this issue and advise you to use more professional language in the future. So she's really coming down on me for saying that. So I said back to her, I feel that a graduate level psychology course in which the professor says that white people are nothing special, Becky's, and that white women's feelings are less important without qualifying these statements with clarity and very careful analysis is seriously lacking in credibility. The videos and examples we have viewed and heard in class are often snarky, comical, and contradictory, and have served to shut down discourse by setting a tone that is mocking and unwelcoming of personal exploration. In terms of professionalism, this has been my main complaint about the way this course has been conducted. I am not one for public speaking, and when I found myself on the spot last week, I began rambling about class participation, but really I have larger complaints. I have consulted with others about this class, including fellow students, therapists, and my faculty advisor, and feel that the way the material has been presented is sophomoric and far beneath the level of complex analysis I expected from the course. I have not contacted the course liaison yet, as I prefer to communicate directly with you, but please do not accuse me of using unprofessional language. You have used the F word several times in class, and just last week, sexually objectified a male show host in what I felt was a gross display of sexism and unprofessional behavior. Not at all the way I would expect a professor would act when charged with helping us to become aware of and overcome culture, and this includes gender bias. In fact, I would posit that this course does not seek to elucidate our unconscious bias for the purpose of striving to provide or less biased therapy, but rather seeks to replace biases against marginalized populations with biases against majority populations. I think this is entirely unprofessional and anti-intellectual in the deepest sense. And then I said a little bit more. Additionally, the fact that you think the cost shows a transactional approach may be revelatory of your own economic position. For some of us, going to graduate school is a sacrifice, and for others, it is a huge sacrifice. The cost is very significant to me and my family, and I feel every bit of it. Okay. So then I said, last paragraph, though I was approached by 5 or 6 classmates afterward to thank me for speaking up, no one really spoke up in class to validate my criticisms. I waited till I got to my car to cry. It was a humiliating experience being left alone like that. I can honestly say that I regret taking this course. This is compounded by the fact that I have friends in another section of this course at this quarter who are having really meaningful discussions of important topics and feel they have grown a great deal in their understanding of multicultural perspectives. The value I have received from this course has been far less than I hoped from a graduate level course that costs as much as this does. And I strongly feel that this should have been a 1-credit hybrid course if this instructor intentionally limited student interaction, as she stated today. And so this part, I'm not really going to get into this because this, in some ways, it was a blessing that this course was just so over the top, blatant, because I was open-minded. I mean, if this had been handled tactfully, I wonder how much of the social justice stuff I might have been susceptible to. I don't know. If I think I'm a critical thinker, and I think I would have rejected it, and maybe I would have found even those other courses less interesting. I mean, one of the friends that I had that was really loving her multicultural course talked about, she would openly say things like cishet white men, which kind of threw me off. You know, is this, she was also of this mindset. So maybe I would have found the same difficulty in any of these courses. So this part's not really, this is not that important here to me now. This was just a point I was making at the time. But let's see what she says here. She says, this is a KCREP required core curriculum course for all counseling education programs. This curriculum design and requirement is largely due to the hard work of Daryl Wing Su, the textbook author who brought the concept into existence in the psychology field. And you can remember his book, so you know the quality there. Then she says, rather than limiting student interaction, I would describe my decision as avoiding centering the emotions of the most privileged students in the room. In my experience and study, this type of classroom experience invariably creates pressure on the most marginalized students to entertain questions about their lives, represent their entire community, and or hold emotional space for those who display fragility. And so I think that's probably telling me that I'm displaying fragility, but this isn't what she said in class. And this mumbo jumbo here, that's social justice language, isn't what she said in class either. She just said that she had not felt that we could have class discussions because it wasn't a safe space. And then here she gives me a required competency, which is the lowest grade you can get besides just not getting a grade. And she says, throughout this course, I have advised you on how to manage these strong emotional reactions to the course, including seeking personal counseling, discussing your experience with classmates, discussing your experience with the course liaison, as well as giving you extensive feedback on your journals to support your self-reflection and challenge your assumptions that I believe might become barriers to meaningful clinical work in the future. So she's telling me that the way that I feel about this and the fact that I'm unable to get to connect with the work of Daryl Wing Su and what she's telling us in the course is going to be a barrier to my having meaningful clinical work in the future. I have to wonder what parts of our identities are interacting that have created such a strong barrier to your learning this quarter. I expect this lies in your expectations of the course, which you have expressed have not been met, but have not described in a way that I can conceptualize. I wonder what she means here. Like I've described it over and over. Okay, sorry, too much editorializing. My best guess is that you expected more time to express your perspectives and learn about the cultural histories and perspectives as your classmates, but were met with mostly lecture delivered material. What is it like for you to be disappointed in your experience and not see yourself accurately represented throughout the course and not be able to express yourself as often and completely as you had hoped? Can you use this experience to empathize with the experiences of others who have been disappointed or felt misled by institutions or authorities they have relied on. I expect to see more respectful language regarding myself and the course material in your final paper, and more self-reflective material rather than your criticisms of the course delivery. This is an important part of your clinical training, for you to communicate using a professional demeanor, even around emotionally charged or controversial topics. I recommend you utilize the Writing Center for assistance if this feedback is unclear. Okay, so if you're still here, thank you for listening and for taking a look. And I feel vulnerable putting these essays out there. This is, you know, I was just kind of where I was trying to grapple with the work. And I think that I would write this very differently if I were doing it today. But in 2019, all of these ideas were really new to me. And this was just me honestly sort of trying to express and process what I was feeling, and also feeling like this professor was pretty hostile. And yeah, I would be interested in what people think when they read what she responded with, because to me, I read that as psychologically abusive. That the responses that I received to what I was saying, the way that she tried to turn it around and make me question my own mental health, telling me that I needed professional counseling in order to grapple with these feelings, and that this was a barrier to me doing meaningful clinical work. And the way that this professor and this curriculum dampen the spirit of academic inquiry and discourse, I think it's very important to point this out, because my impression is that I was a rare person to even question it as much as I did. And that it's presented in such a strong, biased, and intimidating way that I'm not sure they're getting much pushback at all. And one more piece. So this was late 2019 when these journals were being turned in and graded. So it's a couple years ago. This summer, I went into my Google Drive for this program for the first time in a long time. I hadn't looked at these papers, and I found that this professor had shared a number of my journals with another person, with a third party that is unknown to me, despite the fact that there was an extra level of confidentiality applied to these journals in the syllabus. They were not to be shared with anybody unless I was a risk to myself or others. And I went into my Google Drive and found that she had added another person, a third party, who is a social justice focused counselor herself, and I guess a colleague, in order to share my work with this person. And she shared even more personal stuff than these. Like, these are pretty tame. I didn't want to share some of the ones where I did a little bit more self-disclosure, because it just felt too personal. But I did file a grievance about that for the breach of privacy. Anyway, we could get into that, but I think the larger point is made, and I hope you've made it through this, and that you will see what is going on in these programs when people try to question the ideology, even from a very open-minded and liberal point of view. So thank you for your attention and your time, and thanks.